Hey guys, Fox here, and today I'm going to be going over the new map that was just added to the CSGO Active Duty map pool, Ancient. I'm going to be talking about what I think defaults might look like for the CTs and Ts, and how the map controls can play out, and also how the sites might be looked at in terms of executes and actually taking the bomb site. Here's the callouts I'm using right now, just for reference. I think the first thing that's important to understand is some of the timings, so I'm going to look at some of those from the CT's point of view. So the first one here is if a CT has even just a moderate spawn, they don't even have to have a good spawn, they can actually come around to this angle and beat Ts before they can get up into the loop here. So there's lots of options the TTs have with that. They can fight this with a knot potentially, or even just coming around with a flash to jiggle and get info on what the Ts are doing. Next important timing is towards mid, and in here towards mid, the CTs obviously get towards window fast, but they can actually drop down into connector here before the Ts get out Ivy. Now, one thing that CTs can't do though, is they actually can't cross over here and cross this angle on Ivy. The Ts will get here to this angle most of the time first. It is a bit close, but this timing seems to favor the Ts from my testing. On towards the B side, looking at ramp here, the CTs will get to this angle first. However, they're not going to be able to get to this angle. So getting deeper control down into this B area is going to be a bit tricky for the CTs. Now, towards the other side of B in here, towards scaffolding, this angle is interesting because the Ts will get to this angle about a second before the CTs. However, this could still be a good aggressive option, which I'll expand on later, but basically smoking something and just going and making a play through that. So now that we understand the timings, I'm going to take a look at how the CTs might approach this map first. I think the best way to understand how this map might be played from the CTs is probably to compare it to something like Overpass or maybe Cobblestone. And now, what's interesting about this map is it's pretty unique. You can't just say it's like another map, but I think for the purpose of trying to understand how this might be played, that's a fair comparison. So what I mean by that is basically we're looking at the A site being the big site and the B site being the small site. If you're not familiar with big site, small site, big site's basically in a way where more action happens. You typically have more players there and your opera's typically there. But those rules can be broken, and we see that on Overpass because even though A site is probably considered the big site by most people and the opera does play there, you actually only send 2 people there most of the time. And I think that's going to be the case here. I think we're going to see 2 CTs probably coming over towards this A side and 3 coming towards the B side as a general default. I do think this default will probably be broken more than it is on Overpass. On Overpass, you don't tend to switch it up too much. You do occasionally start 4B or maybe 3A, but outside of that, it doesn't get too crazy. I think on this map, you could definitely maybe as much as third as the rounds start 3 people towards the A side. Now for these A players, they obviously have a lot of options similar to Overpass, which is why I think they can get away with playing 2 here. They can double aggress towards mid, they could double aggress towards loop, or they can just split up, play maybe 1 into the connector and 1 in the loop, and then just fall back to site as they need. And also, falling back into the site, there's really good angles in the site here, and also some pretty good crossfires that you can play with just 2 people. So I think this site's really going to be a 2-person site. Over towards the B side, obviously we have the ramp here, which is probably going to be a common place to rush. I think it'll be relatively easy to deal with the CTs as long as they have the manpower here. Obviously, some sort of molly and maybe flashing just to make sure people don't run through that. The other option for the CTs on the B side is aggressing into the scaffolding area, and I think this is going to be pretty common to contest this. And it might not even be that uncommon for the CTs to get a second op over here to try and go for some aggressive peaks. I don't think the second op will necessarily be bought into all the time, but I definitely see it being used. Now for the Ts, what they probably want to be accomplishing is taking mid control, taking the scaffolding control that I was just talking about, and then also likely taking connector most of the time is going to be a good idea. I have a feeling it's going to be a bit hard to hold the A site and an after plant if you just let the CT sit in the connector here. Now in terms of taking control of this room here, this is a bit tricky because at first I thought this might be included in scaff control here. However, when I looked at it more, it looks like this is actually part of the B site. It's actually a position in the B site And the best thing I could compare that to would be kind of like short on Mirage. Typically on Mirage, you have a player going into ladder room and taking control of that, but he doesn't go up and contest the arches and get right before the execute actually comes in, right? Even though those arches aren't part of the bomb site, they are technically part of how the site is held, and you take that control when you actually go for the execute. So I imagine what's going to happen on this map is you'll get a player in here to take control of it, and then he'll wait to go into here, which is like short on Mirage, until your teammates start coming up ramp at the same time. So that way you have people clearing out the bomb site, you have people clearing out arches, or in this case short, and you take the bomb site that way. Of course, there's the option, just like on Mirage, where you can smoke the arches. You could smoke short here and then just come up ramp and maybe try and take control into here, but I'll explain more on that later. Now, looking at how the T's are going to take this map control, I think the first obvious piece is sending one player over towards loop. Now, taking this, I'm not quite sure how it's going to be done, but I think there might be a molly in towards here, and then just hiding just in case this peak ends up being really strong, which it probably will. Of course, you could say that maybe the T should be sending their opera over here to post for this peak, but the thing is there's lots of other peaks on this map as well that could be strong. So we're going to have to see what the T's do in terms of picking and choosing where they want to send their opera to fight. I think this spot isn't going to be where you're going to send your opera most of the time, and more often than not, this is just going to be mollied. You're going to have your rifle hide from that angle, and then come around and clear out angles however he sees fit. Hopefully with a better flash than that. Obviously, there's lots of cubbies in here, and that's going to make it a bit tricky. I did even consider possibly putting a smoke down here, just so that anybody playing inside of loop here is going to be pretty afraid of getting traded out, which you kind of don't want on the CT side, right? You want to go a little bit better than 1-for-1. And if you're just sitting here as a CT, you're only going 1-for-1, and your opera who's playing back trying to support you can't really support you anymore. But I don't know if that smoke is actually really going to become a thing, because you can't just have an opera sat here forever, because if the T's take connector control, he's going to have to be worried about both choke points. So probably what's going to end up happening is you're just going to have a more passive player in here, just kind of slowly clearing some of the initial angles, and then not really advancing too much up, letting his teammates do the work over at mid to allow the site take to be more effective, and then to clear out this area late. On the other side of the map, I think there's going to be at least 2 T's over here. And I think that likely there's going to be a Molotov thrown here at the start of the round as well, maybe a little bit deeper into the scaffolding there. However, I think what might actually end up happening is that the T's are going to end up throwing that from over here instead, just to get it to land that tad bit faster, and also to allow these players to have their guns out since they can get pinched from both scaffolding and ramp. This molly will just deter CTs from coming down here wanting to go for any aggressive picks, or potentially smoking something off here and fighting the other side. Now, of course, with this Molotov, the CTs could still just come through, smoke this molly like that, and jump through. So we'll have to see how the T's are going to be dealing with that. Maybe simply spraying the smoke, or just getting ready to not be exposed to this guy when he peeks from Ivy, and pinch him out later. Now after this molly fades, the 2 people over here towards B side are likely just going to be clearing out these initial angles on scaffolding. I don't think these are great op angles, so just trading them out should be effective. However, they could become somewhat common op angles, so potentially a spam through the corner of this tarp here could be effective for dealing with that. Once scaff control is taken, one of these scaff players can go focus more towards mid. Obviously, these angles can be peeked off from both up here on the catwalk and from down here. But I think more than likely what's going to happen is you're probably going to have one player over here, not even peeking those angles, just throwing a smoke, something like this, to block off the front of connector. Now what this is going to do is it's going to get rid of all these deep op angles in towards mid. Obviously you have the tight one here, you have the one on the pillar right here, and you have the one on the other side of the pillar, along with a whole bunch of off angles. With this smoke down, what it's basically going to do is any opera in here, it's going to make it really awkward because you could come through both sides of the smoke, which is really weird, and then you could fade the smoke, and also when the smoke fades, you can be close on either of these walls. So more than likely with that smoke down, the CTs are just going to back out of this area, maybe leave a rifler in there, but you're definitely not going to have to deal with an opera in this spot. Now I did ignore the window, obviously that'll probably be smoked either from spawn or from one of these players coming out mid. I'll show some of the lineups for that later. Obviously the ones from mid you can just kind of freehand by throwing it off there or something. Now at this point, since the T's have control of connector and scaffolding and also mid, They can go pretty effectively towards either site. Obviously, coming in towards the A site, it's going to be tricky with all these op angles, but I imagine potentially a smoke in here and here can deal with your 2 rotate positions so that you clear out the bomb site. However, there's so many strong angles here, especially with this big box and even this smaller box over here, that it might be better for T's to throw smokes more like this to block off the window and that side of default, and then this one to block off the other side of default, just to have this one less box to worry about. Obviously, putting a molly into there to deal with that. Over towards the B side, obviously you're going to have players coming up ramp, and then players coming through scaff into here to clear this out at the same time. So alongside that, smokes in towards these areas are probably going to be pretty strong. And then also, there's the Molotov into this area, which might actually not become a meta, simply because this wall is so spammable. I don't know how often CTs are realistically going to be playing here. One thing that I think is going to be important for coming into short is actually to jump over this initial angle and then come down into it, simply because I feel like there's going to be a lot of really awkward op angles in here, and if you actually jump over this, that opper can only see your feet because you're on higher ground, and even if he crouches, you can only see your legs. So even if he does hit that flick, it's just going to be a leg shot. You can have a second person swinging behind you to trade, and then that basically forces this guy back here without any kill. And now, even if he does get one as you come through here, he's going to be pinched from both sides. So that should be a pretty effective way to clear this spot out from even oppers. The T's can also hit the sites without taking control of scaffolding or connector here. I imagine something along the lines of this for A site might become a thing, where you smoke off connector, you smoke off mid site, and you smoke off left default there. Obviously that same Molotov from before in towards there. That'll give you basically a wall to enter into the site and only have to deal with these 2 boxes. However, I don't know how easy this site is going to be to hold without connector control, so I don't know how common the strat is going to be. Towards B side, I think coming up ramp without short control is actually a little bit more doable, because what you can do is you can just put a smoke into here, and then not smoke off the other rotation points, and instead what you do is you can have one person potentially posting on this angle, and then your other player, since there's not many angles on site to deal with, quickly clear those before turning their attention to this and pushing into here. Now obviously a good addition to this would probably be putting a molly down there just so that you can isolate these close angles here. Once they're pushed up into here, they have a pretty good afterplant spot that's a good crossfire with ramp, which means you don't necessarily need short control. If you don't have short control and all you have is ramp, obviously that's a problem because you just can't hold an afterplant here. But as soon as you get players pushed up into the lane there, then you're set. So I think the only thing I missed out on is some of the early round protocols towards B for CTs. Obviously, I think a molly, something like this is going to be pretty common, just to make sure the T's can't rush down and get into ramp. Obviously, the T's still have the timing to get in towards scaffolding, which I don't know how much the CTs can deal with. However, we might be seeing some interesting Molotovs, something like this, to deal with that. So imagine that hit the ground. Also, this wall, obviously, is spammable, so if T's like to go fast up here, the CTs can just spam them down. Obviously, it'd be pretty easy for the T's to just smoke this molly as well, and then have flashes coming over behind them to come through ramp. So I imagine we might see the CTs even flashing here as well, just to try and deal with that, so they have the first person coming in and mollying the bottom of ramp, then they have a teammate flash for them just to clear out in front of here in case they try and smoke it and come through. Another early flash the CTs could throw is potentially to come here and actually throw a flash over towards the scaffolding, just to allow one of their players going fast scaffolding to peek this. Since they don't quite have the timing, this could make that peek really safe. And if the T's weren't to molly this, the CTs could potentially even throw that flash and then have this player come quick around like this. The CTs could also even flash in front of scaffolding for that player to come around and peek in towards Ivy. Overall on the B side, I think the most contention you're going to see from the CTs on the ramp area is just going to be this angle, whereas most of the aggressiveness is actually going to come from this side, getting flashes over towards here and fighting in this area. That's why I think this Molotov is probably going to be pretty vital for the T's. That pretty much covers all the theory crafting and how I think the map's going to play out, so I guess I could just go ahead and show some of the nades I found while working on this. A lot of these nades were from my teammates. I didn't really watch a lot of YouTube videos on this map, so I only watched a couple. If I did get any nades from any of those other YouTubers, I'll try and give them the credit. But most of these nades are from my teammates. So on towards the A side, throwing a Molotov into there, you don't need a lineup for that. Getting a flash into here, you also don't need a lineup for that. But smokes over towards the A side, come into the middle of these here, into the crack, and you find the leaves. There's these 2 circles here. You want to aim at the left one. You jump through that, that's actually going to come into the candles area here and smoke off both of the windows. The other smoke fray that's going to be pretty important is the one towards CT, which you can actually throw with one of the connector players coming into here and aiming right here. Now, this is one of the nades I actually got from another YouTuber, Banana Gaming. Pretty cool guy. Check him out. As for the other smokes on site, I don't actually know them. I've seen people throw them. I don't know what they are. Should be easy to figure out. There's plenty of nade videos online. I'm sure people come out with a lot of nade videos on this map, so. Also for flashes over, those are probably going to be pretty vital. I actually also don't really know the lineups for those yet, but honestly, they're probably not going to be that hard. They're probably just going to be general flashes over this area to blind anybody on big bucks. In towards middle, this is the scaffolding molly from mid. You just come into the corner at the top of the box and jump throw. Then obviously coming out to mid, put some flashes behind yourself just to cross out. From here, you can smoke window, something like that. Should bounce in there pretty effectively. I missed that a little bit. Maybe work on it. On this side, I think it's a little bit easier. You can just bounce it straight off that and it should go in there. Throwing the connector smoke is also pretty simple. Come against the wall here and just make sure you can see this. 2 plus signs, aim in the middle of those. That'll land nice and deep without any gaps. Make it really awkward for the CTs. The last smoke from mid is obviously the window smoke. Thrown from spawn here, you can find this side of the brick and jump through that. And I do occasionally miss this, but I didn't this time, so there you go. On towards B side, this is actually where I have some util knowledge, so this will be a little bit more interesting. Obviously, flashes over towards the start, or if you're rushing, are going to be pretty useful, just to get people off these ramp angles. And then if you just want to hit up ramp, util from here can be pretty effective. If you find the middle of this building, just up a little bit. You also throw a Molly saw from this spot as well. That's going to smoke off short, Molly wood wall. So if you want to rush ramp or just do a late ramp hit and not take short, you can do that and come up this way. Also, if you want to pair a flash with that, aim at this crack and double click, jump throw. Come right over the wall, allow your players to come out here. Maybe you want to get an outpost on this angle. As your entries come up, throwing a Molotov towards the stairs here. Like I said earlier, probably be pretty effective. This always seems to land weird for me, so I don't know if people are actually going to find a lineup for this or not. But no matter what I do, it never spreads to the front here, which means somebody could potentially just sit on this angle, which is a really nasty angle, by the way. The other nades you can throw from this spot, if you want to take short control and split from ramp and short, you can find this really oddly square brick here and aim at the bottom of it for a jump throw. And you can also throw that Molotov from before. That's going to smoke off CT here, and same molly as before. Now if you want to smoke off temple with that, probably a good idea. You can have potentially one of your short players throwing this. Come into here, find the white down to this line. Sometimes aim a little bit to the left, and double click jump throw for that one. This is the flushest way I found to throw the smoke, just so it's not sticking out awkwardly where the CTs can potentially make plays through it. Other good nades to throw could just be flashes over here over the temple. If you have people coming up ramp swinging like this, blind anybody towards pillar, or anybody running out of the Molotov and towards wood wall. Obviously, you just have to be careful with that. If you have players coming up short, you don't want to throw it so late that it blinds your short players, and you don't want to blind it if you have players swinging like this either. This is another little neat flash if you come up towards this curb here and aim off from the top of the white. I kind of think about this like the pillar flash and overpass. It just lands behind the pillar so it doesn't blind your teammates coming up from ramp. Kind of like if it doesn't blind your teammates coming out from monster on overpass. But it will blind people playing towards here. That's pretty much what I think of the map so far and how it's going to play. Obviously, with this being a new map, the meta is going to be pretty rapidly changing, I imagine. Especially considering, as I said at the start of the video, you can't really compare this to other maps, so people can't just take previous knowledge and apply it here. So there's going to be a lot of change. The things I do think that are going to be staying are likely a Molotov here, and then one way or another, Ts are going to have to deal with the aggression towards loop here. I have heard about people complaining about the amount of cubbies, especially towards the A side in this area, so that might be cut down on the future to make it a little bit easier. But at the end of the day, with how the timings work, the CTs just have such an advantage here in my opinion. But yeah, so that's about it. I'm certainly no CSGO expert, but this is just what I think, so we'll have to see how the map plays out. But anyways, guys, hope you guys enjoyed. Have a good one.